Have you ever had something going on with your body and you felt sure that you knew what was causing it? Headaches are a good example. I've noticed that people who have recurring headaches often have an explanation for them. It's stress, or it's the weather, or it's my sinuses, or I didn't sleep well, or I get tension headaches. And people who experience migraines may simply say, I get migraines. it's it becomes something that they know about themselves, something they manage, something they've learned to live with. But a migraine describes what is happening. It doesn't necessarily tell us why it's happening. And that distinction matters. Certainly, there are recognized migraine triggers, and there are people with long-standing migraine disorders who need appropriate medical care. But even then, I think there's value in remaining curious. Why does one person's nervous system respond to a particular trigger with a migraine while another person's doesn't? And why do migraines become more frequent during one period of life and less frequent during another? Could hormones be involved? Blood sugar fluctuations? How about sleep or dehydration? Nutrient status? Stress physiology? Certain foods or environmental exposures? It could even be several things interacting. And most importantly, are we certain the explanation we've accepted is actually the explanation? The same principle applies throughout the body. Your knee hurts. You assume it's arthritis. Maybe the doctor said it was. Your stomach is upset, so you assume it was something you ate. You can't sleep, so you decide you have a sleep problem. You're exhausted every afternoon, so you tell yourself you're just getting older. We're very good at giving our symptoms names and explanations. But sometimes the name simply describes here and where or how the problem is showing up. It doesn't necessarily tell us about there, what may be driving it. And sometimes we become so accustomed to saying, I have migraines, or I have bad knees, or I'm a terrible sleeper, or I've always had digestive problems. We stop asking whether there might be something we can actually do about it. That's the question I want to open up today, not with the promise that every chronic problem has a simple answer, because it doesn't. But neither do I think that we should automatically assume that because something has been happening for years, that it simply has to be that way. Welcome to the Signals Room. This is where we look beneath the surface in health and wellness at the patterns, connections, and quiet messages our bodies may be sending long before we understand what they mean. And today I want to explore an idea that can completely change the questions we ask about those messages. Sometimes even the story we think we already know may not be the whole story. We are not a collection of parts. One of the limitations of the way we've learned to think about health is that we tend to divide the body into pieces. There's the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, the endocrine, the nervous system, the immune system, the musculoskeletal system. And of course, those distinctions are useful. We need names for things, but your body doesn't experience itself that way. Your nervous system communicates with your digestive system, and your gut communicates with your immune system. Your liver influences metabolism and hormone processing. Your hormones affect your brain, your bones, muscles, sleep, and your mood. Your blood vessels deliver oxygen and nutrients everywhere. Nothing is operating alone. So sometimes the place where we experience a problem isn't necessarily the place where the process began. Let me give you some examples. Your feet may be talking about your metabolism. Suppose you begin noticing tingling, burning, or numbness in your feet. Obviously, something's happening in the feet, but the story may not have started there. Persistently elevated blood glucose can damage the small blood vessels and the nerves over time. The longest peripheral nerves, the ones traveling all the way down to our feet, can be particularly vulnerable. So the feet may not be where you feel your feet may be where you feel the signal, but glucose regulation and metabolic health may be part of what's happening there upstream. And that's a very important distinction, because if we only ask, what can I do for my feet to make them feel better, we may be asking too small a question. Certainly, we want the feet to feel better. There's nothing wrong with addressing discomfort, but we also need to ask, why are these nerves struggling in the first place? Because if elevated blood sugar is part of what's damaging those nerves, then soothing the feet may help the symptom while the underlying process continues. The feet are here. The metabolic problem may be there. And there may be what ultimately needs our attention. Let's talk about brain fog. It may not begin in your brain. Let's say you can't concentrate. You walk into a room, you can't remember why you're there, or words don't come as easily as they used to. And by mid-afternoon, your brain feels like somebody pulled a curtain across it. So naturally you think, what's wrong with my brain? But brain fog isn't one single thing with one single cause. Sleep disruption can often affect cognition. Blood sugar, again, fluctuations can affect concentration and energy. Hormonal changes can influence neurotransmission and cognition. Nutrient deficiencies can matter. Inflammatory processes can affect signaling in the brain. Even chronic stress matters, because the brain and the nervous system are constantly responding to the chemistry of our stress response. So again, the signal is here in the brain, but the story could involve something happening elsewhere, there. And simply finding another way to push through the fog, say another cup of coffee, another energy drink, another strategy for forcing ourselves to concentrate, that doesn't necessarily address what's creating it. Let's talk about sleep, because your sleep problem may not be about sleep. This is one of my favorites because we've talked about sleep before in the signals room. Someone says, I can't sleep. And understandably, they start looking for something that will make them sleep. But what if the body isn't failing at sleep? What if it's doing exactly what it's being instructed to do? If your nervous system is continually receiving signals of threat or stress, your body may have difficulty shifting into the physiological state that supports sleep, deep restorative sleep. Or perhaps blood sugar drops during the night and the body responds with counter-regulatory hormones that's designed to bring it back up. Or hormonal changes are affecting temperature regulation and sleep architecture. You experienced the result at 2 o'clock in the morning, but the process that got you there may have started hours or even years earlier. So rather than only asking, how do I make myself sleep? We should also ask, what might be keeping my body from feeling ready to sleep? Because that's a very different question. Something that helps us become drowsy may be useful. Sometimes we desperately need the sleep. But if a chronically activated stress response is keeping the nervous system on alert, making ourselves sleepy doesn't necessarily address why the body's having trouble settling in the first place. Again, we've addressed here without necessarily addressing there. Your aching joints may have a bigger story too. Here's another place I think we tend to focus almost entirely on here. Something hurts, a hip, a knee, a shoulder, your hand. And certainly there may be structural reasons. An old injury, cartilage changes, repetitive use, arthritis, something that genuinely needs to be evaluated locally. But even then, that tissue doesn't exist in isolation. Hormonal changes can affect connective tissue, bone remodeling, and inflammatory signaling. Systemic inflammation can influence how your joints feel. Poor sleep can increase pain sensitivity. Muscle weakness somewhere else in the kinetic chain can change the load being placed on a particular joint. Even the way you walk because one ankle hurts can eventually change what happens in the knee, the hip, or the back. The pain may be here, the contributing factor may be there, and sometimes there can be several theirs. That's why continually soothing the painful spot doesn't always solve the mystery. If the way we move is repeatedly putting abnormal stress on the joint, for example, the joint may continue to hurt until we address the mechanics contributing to the problem. Your skin may be telling you about something deeper. Skin's another fascinating example because it's the part of us that we can actually see. Dryness, breakouts, rashes, changes in texture. Obviously, the skin itself can have local problems, and persistent or changing skin issues deserve appropriate evaluation. But skin also responds to what's happening throughout the body. Again, hormonal changes can alter oil production and skin structure. Nutritional status matters because skin cells need raw materials to continually rebuild themselves. The immune system can influence inflammatory skin responses. The gut and skin communicate through immune and metabolic pathways. Circulation affects delivery of oxygen and nutrients to tissue. So sometimes what appears on the outside invites us to ask what might be happening on the inside. We may be able to soothe the skin, and again, there's value in that. But if the same problem keeps returning, perhaps the more important question is not simply, what can I put on this? Perhaps it's, why does my body keep producing this response? What if there is the root of the problem? And this is where the distinction between here and there becomes more than interesting. Sometimes there isn't merely contributing to what we're feeling. There may actually be where the problem begins. And if that's the case, we can spend an enormous amount of time trying to manage what we feel without ever addressing what's driving it. Think about those burning or tingling feet we talked about. You might find something that soothes them, and there's nothing wrong with wanting relief. Relief does matter. But if chronically elevated blood sugar is damaging nerves, soothing the feet doesn't stop the process that continues to affect those nerves. Or take a recurring digestive discomfort. We might continually reach for something to settle the stomach after we eat, but if the underlying issue involves poor digestion, a food intolerance, altered gut function, or medication effects, or something else that needs attention, repeatedly calming the discomfort doesn't necessarily change what's creating it. The same can be true with sleep. We can find something that helps us become drowsy at night, but if a chronically activated stress response is keeping the nervous system on alert, we haven't necessarily addressed the reason the body is struggling. And pain is another good example. We can continually soothe the place that hurts, but if pain is being perpetuated by the way we move, muscle weakness somewhere else, systemic inflammation, or another underlying process, the painful area may keep asking for our attention. That's the difference between managing a signal and investigating what's generating it. Sometimes a symptom relief is exactly what we need, and sometimes treating the symptom itself is appropriate. This is not an argument against that. I do it all the time. But when all we ever do is quiet the signal without asking why, we may be putting a Band-Aid over something the body is still trying to talk to us about. And that's where I think the idea of root cause becomes important. I use that term carefully because there isn't always one neat, identifiable root cause. Human biology is much more complicated than that, and there may be several contributing factors interacting with one another. But that doesn't mean we stop looking. we can still ask, what's driving this? What is perpetuating it? What would need to change for my body to stop needing to produce this signal? Because ultimately, I don't just want to become better at silencing my body's messages. I want to understand why it needed to send them in the first place. So, from what's wrong here to what's happening there is a subtle shift I've learned to make over the years. Instead of immediately asking what's wrong with this part of my body, I ask, what might my body be responding to? What's changed? What else is happening? Did this begin after a period of unusual stress? Has my sleep changed? My appetite, my digestion, my activity? What about hormones, blood sugar? Have I changed medications or supplements? Did something happen physically? Are there seemingly unrelated signals that appeared around the same time? Not because we should diagnose ourselves, but because patterns contain information. And sometimes two things we've been treating as completely separate aren't separate at all. And sometimes there isn't somewhere else. There's something else I think is important to say. We can get so excited about connecting the dots and looking for root causes that we start looking for some exotic hidden explanation for everything. Sometimes your knee hurts because you injured your knee. And sometimes you're tired because you stayed up until midnight. And sometimes your stomach hurts because lunch didn't agree with you. And sometimes a symptom needs medical evaluation rather than detective work. The point isn't to assume that every symptom has a mysterious cause somewhere. It's simply to remember that the body is a system. And when something persists or keeps returning or doesn't make sense despite addressing the obvious, it may be worth widening the lens because there isn't always somewhere else. Sometimes it is. And if it is, addressing here over and over again may never get us to where we want to go. The signal is an invitation. And I think this is one of the reasons I've become so interested in listening to the body's signals rather than simply trying to silence them. A symptom is uncomfortable. Of course, we want it gone, but discomfort also gets our attention. And perhaps instead of immediately asking, how do I stop it? Maybe occasionally ask, what is this asking me to notice? Not with fear and not with obsession, and certainly not with the assumption that every ache or odd sensation means something terrible, but only with curiosity. Because your body is not a collection of unrelated pieces. It's an extraordinarily interconnected system, constantly adapting, compensating, and communicating. Sometimes the place that hurts really is the problem. And sometimes the symptom itself needs to be treated. But sometimes the symptom is more like the check engine light on your dashboard. We can cover the light so we don't have to look at it, but that doesn't change what's caused the light to come on. And that, to me, is what listening to the body's signals is really about. Not becoming afraid of every symptom, not obsessing over every little change, and not rejecting the things that give us relief. It's about becoming curious enough to ask one more question. Why? Why is this happening? Why does it keep happening? What else is happening when it began? And is the place where I feel the problem really where the story starts? Because sometimes you feel it here, but the story started there. And if we find there, we may finally have an opportunity to do more than put another Band-Aid on here. Until next time, keep listening for the signals beneath the surface.